In 1987, Sarah Whitlock turned on the porch light of her lake house and vanished. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. Her coffee was still warm. Her husband claimed she went for a walk and never came back. For 36 years, the case went cold, until a sealed crawl space beneath the porch revealed something that should have never been buried. Subscribe for more cinematic investigations into the world's coldest cases. September 17th, 1987. Location: Summerfield Lake, North Carolina. The light glowed amber against the black water. It flickered once, a subtle stammer in the filament, and then steadied, casting long shadows across the wooden porch of the Whitlock Lake House. A soft breeze curled through the pine trees, brushing the wind chimes into a delicate murmur. The night air was thick with late summer humidity, and somewhere across the lake, a loon called out, distant and mournful. Inside the house, the record player clicked off, the needle retreating with a soft, static sigh. A coffee mug sat half full on the kitchen table. One chair pushed slightly back, as if its occupant had risen in a casual, unhurried way. The back screen door was closed but unlatched. Sarah Whitlock had turned on the light before stepping outside. That's what her husband Alan told the police the next morning. She'd gone out for a walk around 9:30, barefoot and in her robe, saying she needed air. He claimed he'd fallen asleep on the couch. When he woke up at 2 a.m. and realized she wasn't back, he checked the woods, called her name, even took the car and drove around the lake road. Nothing. He called 911 just before dawn. By the time the sheriff arrived, the coffee was cold, the record had long since stopped spinning, and the porch light still burned, steadfast and indifferent. There were no signs of a struggle. No broken glass, no drag marks, no blood. Her robe was gone, but her sandals sat neatly beside the porch steps. Her purse, ID, and car keys were untouched. Sarah Whitlock had disappeared as cleanly as if the darkness had reached out and swallowed her whole. September 18th, 1987. Location: Summerfield Sheriff's Department, North Carolina. The deputy was still rubbing sleep from his eyes when Sheriff Don Keller dropped the file on his desk. "Missing person," Keller said. "Lake House. Husband says she went for a walk last night and didn't come back." The deputy, 23 and fresh out of academy, squinted at the single sheet of paper in the folder. "Sarah Whitlock?" Keller nodded, then added with a dry grunt, "Wife of Alan Whitlock. You know the name." The deputy did. Everyone in Summerfield did. Alan Whitlock was a local contractor with a sterling reputation, owner of Whitlock and Sons Construction, though there were no sons, only a logo. Clean-shaven, buttoned-up, church every Sunday kind of man. His company had built half the lakefront properties in the region, including the sprawling cedar-shingled home he shared with his wife at the edge of Summerfield Lake. Whitlock claims he fell asleep on the couch, woke up and she was gone, Keller said. Porch light still on, coffee warm, no purse, no car, no footprints. The young deputy frowned. "Any signs of forced entry?" "Not a scratch," Keller said, "which doesn't rule out a damn thing." He walked back toward his office, pausing at the door. "Get your boots. We're going to the house." The lake shimmered with early morning haze as they pulled up the long gravel drive. Pine needles crunched underfoot as the two men stepped out, silence thick in the air. The Whitlock house sat elevated, its wide wraparound porch facing the water. A porch swing creaked idly in the breeze. The bulb above the front door glowed faintly, still burning from the night before, casting a pale halo against the cedar siding. Keller knocked once, then entered. "Alan." The man emerged from the kitchen, his face pale and drawn, eyes rimmed with fatigue. He wore the same clothes as the night before, gray slacks and a white undershirt, both wrinkled. "I already told the dispatcher everything." "We know," Keller said gently. "We just need to walk through it again." Alan gestured toward the kitchen table. 2 chairs, a half-full mug of coffee, a record sleeve on the counter. She was sitting right there, he said. We were listening to music, talking about the baby. The deputy stiffened. She's pregnant? Alan nodded. 3 months, we just found out. Keller scribbled something in his pad. So she gets up, says she needs air, says she's restless, stands, walks out back, leaves the door open. I thought I'd follow her out, but I guess I dozed off. He looked toward the back door, where the screen hung crooked on its hinges. I woke up around 2, realized she wasn't back. I checked the woods, the driveway, took the car out down the service road. Nothing. That's when I called you. The sheriff paused. Did she take anything? Just her robe, Alan said. Her wallet's in the drawer, keys on the hook. She didn't plan to leave. You can feel it. They followed him to the back porch. The wind had picked up. Leaves scattered across the steps. Her sandals sat beside them, untouched. Maybe she walked barefoot, the deputy offered. Maybe, Keller replied, unconvinced. They searched the surrounding woods that day, and again the next. Bloodhounds were brought in from the next county, but they lost the scent halfway down the shoreline. A helicopter swept the forest edge and marshy inlet. Nothing turned up. By the 3rd day, local volunteers joined in. Firefighters, churchgoers, old classmates of Sarah's from high school. Boats combed the lake in grid formation. Dive teams were brought in. Still nothing. It was as if Sarah had simply stopped existing. 3 weeks later, the search was scaled back. There were no ransom calls, no sightings, no notes. Theories multiplied. Some believed she drowned, swept into the current near the dam. Others whispered that she'd run away. Perhaps the pregnancy wasn't Alan's, but her bank accounts remained untouched. Her passport was still in the dresser drawer. No bags were missing. No friends had heard from her. Still others looked to Alan, a husband left alone with no witnesses. The half-drunk coffee, the walk at night. It was the oldest story in the book. But the house was clean. His alibi, thin as it was, had no holes they could punch through, and there was no body. Sheriff Keller pushed, gently at first, then more directly. He brought Alan in for further questioning, asked him to walk through the night step by step, asked about their marriage, their finances, their plans for the baby. Alan never changed his story. Not once. Not even in the details. People fight, Keller told him during the 3rd interview. Couples argue, especially when a baby's on the way. Alan looked at him, steady. We weren't fighting. You sure? I loved her, Alan said, voice flat but firm. And someone took her from me. By the end of October, the light above the porch was finally switched off. The house sat dark. Alan moved out before Thanksgiving. The property was placed in a trust and closed up. The porch light had burned for 62 days. No one ever forgot it. October 4th, 2023. Location: Whitlock Property, Summerfield Lake, North Carolina. By late morning, the front porch had begun to groan beneath the weight of fresh boots and new curiosity. Lena Vargas had been the first to notice the warped boards near the front steps, the way the wood dipped slightly, unnaturally, as if something below had shifted. She crouched low, knuckles brushing pine needles, and aimed her flashlight into the crawl space. Nothing at first. Then, behind a column of stacked stone and webbing, a shape. Boxy, metal, wedged tightly between 2 beams. Behind her, Darren Thorne cursed as he stepped outside. That foundation's toast. Rot all the way through the joists. Forget the joists, Lena said, voice low. There's something under here. By early afternoon, the object was on the back picnic table, a lockbox coated in rust and grit. The combination dial had eroded to a smooth disc. Darren snapped it open with bolt cutters. Inside, cassette tapes, brittle envelopes, and a tightly bound bundle of photographs yellowed with age. Atop the pile sat a letter marked in shaky, handwritten ink. Sarah's will. Do not destroy. Lena stared. Wait, Sarah Whitlock. Darren nodded slowly. That's the house, the missing woman, 30-some years ago. She was pregnant, Lena whispered. I remember the story. Never found her. They stood in silence, sunlight slipping through the tree line as the wind stirred dead leaves around their feet. By the time they loaded the box into Lena's truck, neither of them spoke. They drove straight to the sheriff's department. Detective Jamie Rudd had just returned from a welfare check when the front desk buzzed her about the contractors. She met them in interview room C, a woman in work boots and a man who looked like he hadn't wanted to come at all. The box sat untouched between them. Found it under the porch, Lena said. Didn't want to leave it behind. It felt off. Jamie nodded and put on gloves. She opened the envelope first. Inside were 6 sheets of lined paper and a note scrawled in uneven loops. If something happens to me, it will not be an accident. Alan says I forget things, that I leave the lights on, that I sleepwalk. I do not. I remember what I remember. Jamie didn't answer right away. She set the letter aside and pulled one of the cassette tapes from the box. Tape 3. August 3, 1 a.m. Alan talking in sleep. She rose without a word and walked it straight down to the forensics lab. By evening, the audio was digitized and filtered. Jamie sat alone in the AV suite as the first file played through her headphones. Sarah's voice was hushed, shaky. He's not sleeping again. He talks in his sleep. I heard him say her name, Camille. I don't know who that is. He says I lose things, that I forget. But I don't. I don't. The second tape was harder to hear, staticky, layered with what sounded like wind or breath. He locks the office now, says it's for work. But I found the second key. I saw what was in there. She had my robe, my face. I think he wants me gone. By the time the third tape ended, the moon was up and the department hallways had gone dark. Jamie removed the headset, her mind racing. She didn't speak, just pulled out her phone and called the tech team. Tell Marla to get the radar, she said. We're going back to the lake house first thing. Sunrise crept over the water the next morning, casting the Whitlock property in pale gold as the forensic van rumbled up the gravel drive. Marla, the GPR operator, ran the ground-penetrating radar in slow, deliberate passes beneath the porch. It took less than 10 minutes. 2 anomalies, both rectangular, one deeper than the other, one directly beneath the steps, the other farther back, beneath the porch light. Marla straightened slowly. That's not natural. Jamie stepped forward, eyes locked on the screen. Is it a body? Or something that used to be, Marla said. But I'll tell you this. Someone put it there. Jamie didn't flinch. Mark both sites. We dig this afternoon. October 5th, 2023. Location, Whitlock Property, Summerfield Lake, North Carolina. The first shovel struck the earth at 2:07 p.m. Jamie Rudd stood just beyond the porch steps, arms folded against a biting October wind, as 2 forensic diggers worked the soil under the lattice. The light above the porch still hung crooked, its glass caked with dust, bulb long burned out, but it cast a symbolic shadow on the spot they'd marked the day before. Top layers shallow, one of the techs noted. No concrete, just packed loam and gravel. The dig moved quickly at first. Within the hour they hit something, fabric, old, fraying, but shaped, contoured. A forensics assistant crouched low and began brushing it with a soft paintbrush. As more dirt fell away, the outline revealed itself. A wicker bassinet, collapsed inward. Scorched on the bottom. Empty. The team paused. Jamie's breath caught. She was telling the truth. About being pregnant? Marla asked quietly beside her. Jamie nodded. That she expected something to happen. That she wasn't safe. A second dig site was already in motion 5 feet away, where the radar had marked a deeper, more defined void. This one took longer. At just past 4:30 p.m., they found what they were looking for. The metal edge of a sealed container, buried at an angle and wedged tight between two foundational stones. One of the diggers, young and clearly rattled, stepped back. "It's locked." Jamie knelt beside it. The latches were rusted, but they broke with effort. The lid lifted. Inside were photographs, still sealed in plastic. A folded robe, its silk faded and brittle. A set of women's sandals. A blank journal. And beneath it all, a small tape recorder, the same make as the tapes found earlier, batteries long dead, tape inside still threaded. But no body, not yet. The sun dipped behind the trees just as they reached the anomaly's lower layer. It began with a fragment of bone. A femur. Human. Buried at a shallow curve, the tip angled upward unnaturally. The dig team fell silent. All tools were exchanged for brushes and hand trowels. By nightfall, a full female skeleton had been exposed, curled into a fetal position, one arm tucked beneath the rib cage, her head bowed as if sleeping. A rusted crucifix still hung around her neck. The gold band on her ring finger hadn't budged in 36 years. No obvious signs of trauma, no bullet holes, no broken ribs or blunt force fractures. If Sarah Whitlock had been murdered, the method had left no visible trace. Jamie turned her gaze toward the pelvis. There, beneath it, almost tucked into her body, were tiny fetal bones, fragile, barely ossified, stillborn or never delivered. The temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "She didn't just disappear," Jamie said. "She was put here." Hours later, back at the station, the remains were secured and tagged. The dig site was covered and sealed. The evidence locker now held 2 more tapes pulled from the container, plus the camera used to photograph each layer of excavation. Jamie sat alone at her desk, staring at the open file of Sarah Whitlock's original case. Missing, August 17th, 1987. Last seen on her front porch wearing a robe. Witnesses, none. Status, presumed runaway. No foul play determined. There had been whispers, of course, neighbors who'd said she seemed off. Churchgoers who said Alan had changed after she got pregnant, but no charges, no evidence. Now, all of that had changed. Just after midnight, Jamie listened to one of the recovered tapes. Sarah's voice was different here, more erratic, like she was unraveling in real time. "He says I left the light on again, that I'm wasting electricity, but I didn't. I remember turning it off. I always remember. He moved my robe. I know he did. It was wet. It smelled like lake water. I didn't go near the lake." He was whispering to someone on the phone again. Said the name Camille. "I thought I imagined it at first. But she's real. I think she's been in the house. If I'm found, tell them I didn't forget. I never forgot." Jamie leaned back, removed the headset, and stared at the ceiling. One more name had surfaced. Camille. She typed it into the database. No match in Sarah's family. No friends listed under that name in the original report. No mention anywhere in Alan Whitlock's known contacts. But a hunch had started to form. A soft thread. Because in the next tape, Sarah didn't sound afraid. She sounded furious. "He told me if I left the light on again, he'd have to take it away. Said I was broken, that I was confusing the timelines. But I know what he's doing. I saw the other one. She looked like me. She was me." Jamie paused, rewound the last part. "She looked like me. She was me." She called records at 2:16 a.m., asked for any property transfers connected to the Whitlocks after 1987. The clerk yawned and scanned the archive. Then, a beat later, there was a sealed trust. Property title stayed under Alan Whitlock's name until this month. Jamie blinked. "He's alive?" "Yeah. Lives outside Chapel Hill. Retirement facility. Checked in under his own name. Nothing sealed." The line went quiet. Jamie finally whispered, 36 years and he never left the county. October 6th, 2023. Location, Rose Hill Retirement Community, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. The entrance to Rose Hill Retirement Community looked more like a country club than a care facility. Well-manicured hedges, a long circular drive, and fountainless water features that had once been ornamental but now just looked forgotten. Jamie Rudd stepped out of her unmarked sedan at 9:03 a.m., rain slicking the shoulders of her coat. She checked her notepad twice before crossing the flagstone path toward the front desk. Alan Whitlock, she told the receptionist. Room? The young woman blinked at her badge, then typed without asking further. East Wing, room 214. He's awake. Just finished breakfast. Jamie nodded her thanks, but her stomach turned as she moved toward the elevator. 36 years. That's how long he'd lived under his own name, less than 2 hours from the house where his wife and unborn child had been buried. And no one had noticed. No one had even looked. Room 214 faced a parking lot. The man inside sat near the window in a worn armchair, wrapped in a cable-knit cardigan too thick for the humidity. His skin was pale, almost translucent, eyes sharp but sunken. A tray of untouched breakfast sat on a side table. Jamie took her time approaching. Mr. Whitlock? He didn't turn. They told me someone might come, eventually. Her shoes stopped on the hardwood. I'm Detective Rudd. I'm reopening the investigation into your wife's disappearance. Now he turned and smiled. Oh, Sarah never disappeared, he said softly. She just got quiet. Jamie didn't respond. She pulled the tape recorder from her coat and set it on the small round table between them. Do you know what this is? He stared at it, eyes unfocused. And for a moment, she thought he might deny everything. But instead, his fingers twitched in his lap. She liked to record, he murmured. She said it helped her remember, but it didn't. She remembered too much. Jamie leaned in. Is Camille real? His mouth tightened. Camille was necessary. She didn't blink. You said on one of the tapes that Sarah was confusing timelines, that she was broken. What did you mean? He closed his eyes. You won't understand. They never do. But it doesn't matter. It's all ending now. Jamie stood abruptly. You buried her beneath your porch? You lived on top of her remains for how long? 5 years? 10? His voice barely rose. She left the light on. Back at the station by mid-afternoon, Jamie began cross-referencing Camille's name with every alias, every woman in Alan's orbit. Still nothing. Until records called. Got something, the clerk said. Tied to a rental cabin under Alan's name. Different county, but he listed it as a business retreat. Name on the lease was Camille Weller. Location, Yadkin River Valley. Way out there. Jamie clicked her pen once, twice. Current occupant. Vacant since 1998. Power still on. By dusk, Jamie was standing in front of the cabin. It was secluded. One dirt road in. Overgrown brush on either side. The trees leaned too close, as if trying to swallow the structure whole. There was no mailbox, no welcome mat, no signs of recent use. But the porch light was on. Still on. She drew her weapon and approached slowly. The door was locked, but not tight. A nudge of her boot loosened the frame. Inside, the air was musty. Faint smell of lavender, undercut by rot. The front room was almost empty. Just a chair, a dusty vanity mirror, and a twin bed with a worn quilt folded tight. And on the nightstand beside the bed, a photograph. Jamie picked it up slowly. It was Sarah, younger, wearing the same robe found in the lockbox, but she wasn't alone. Next to her stood a woman identical in face and frame, but the eyes were wrong, colder, smiling too wide. The back of the photo was labeled Camille, 1986. Jamie's hand shook as she replaced it. There were no tapes here, no notebooks, just a single drawer in the nightstand, locked but hollow. She pried it open. Inside, a silver key, a bottle of prenatal vitamins, and a slip of paper with one line written in Sarah's looping script. If the light is still on, I never left. October 7th, 2023. Location, Summerfield Police Department, North Carolina. Jamie Rudd didn't sleep. By sunrise, she was back in the evidence room, gloves on, light dimmed to avoid glare off the photo she now studied for the third time. Two women, identical, standing shoulder to shoulder on a brick porch, one in a floral robe, the other in denim and boots. Same eyes, same jawline, same parted smile. But only one was Sarah Whitlock. The other was Camille. Jamie flipped the photograph again. Camille, 1986, a year before Sarah vanished, a year before the tapes began. Across the table, forensic analyst Trish Monroe peered over Jamie's shoulder. You think they were sisters? Sarah was an only child. No record of adoption, no twins, nothing sealed. Trish frowned. Then that's either a double exposure or a staged identity, Jamie finished. A constructed persona. Trish raised an eyebrow. You think someone made another Sarah? Jamie didn't answer, but the implication was already unraveling inside her head. By mid-morning, Jamie had pulled every document she could find on Alan Whitlock's career. Before his quiet retirement in 2002, Alan had worked as a private behavioral consultant. No firm listed, no partners. But his tax returns showed annual income spikes linked to unnamed federal clients. And then there was this, an invoice filed under a now-defunct LLC, charging for environmental stress mapping, memory suppression protocol, and interpersonal conflict simulations. Jamie stared at the page until her eyes blurred. Memory suppression. Simulations. None of this had appeared in the original missing persons report. It had been written off, like so many women before Sarah, as a domestic tragedy. A silent woman, a controlling husband, an accident, a disappearance. Case closed. But this wasn't a disappearance. This was an experiment. At 2:10 p.m., she drove back out to the Whitlock property. The crime scene tape still fluttered around the edges of the porch. Inside, the excavation site had been refilled and tarped, but the interior of the house remained untouched. Jamie stepped into the foyer, flashlight in hand. She moved slowly through the kitchen, scanning for signs she'd missed earlier. Nail marks in the floorboards, paint streaks on the wall. In the hallway near the bedroom, she stopped. A closet door, padlocked shut. Jamie knelt and picked it. The lock clicked open after 3 tries. Inside, shelves of VHS tapes, all unmarked. Dozens of them, coated in dust. Some cracked, others still pristine. She grabbed 5 and loaded them into a cardboard box, then carried it out to the cruiser. By evening, she sat in the AV suite, alone, light off. The first tape opened with static. Then, a woman in profile, wearing the floral robe, sitting stiffly on a wooden chair in what looked like the same hallway closet. She was crying, but her voice was calm. I don't want to go back. I told him I don't remember anything. But I do. He says Camille is safer than I am, that she obeys. But I remember the night on the porch. I remember the light was already off. A second tape flickered. Same woman, different robe, different chair. He gave her my name, my clothes, but she doesn't feel like me. He says the real me left the light on, that she forgot the rules. I didn't forget. I never forgot. Jamie sat perfectly still. Sarah hadn't just been recording her husband. She'd been recording herself, versions of herself. Camille wasn't a woman. Camille was a role, an identity Alan had forced onto Sarah, maybe over and over again. And Sarah had fought back, in secret, in coded tapes, with the only tool she had left, memory. At 11:44 p.m., Jamie stared out the window of her apartment. watching the wind scatter leaves across the pavement. She replayed the sentence in her head. If the light is still on, I never left. What if Sarah hadn't meant it metaphorically? What if the porch light wasn't just a symbol? She pulled out the key found at the river cabin and made a decision. October 8th, 2023. Location: River Cabin, Yadkin Valley, North Carolina. Jamie arrived just after dawn. Mist hung low over the trees, weaving through the underbrush like smoke. The gravel drive crackled beneath her tires. No other vehicles, no footprints. The porch light, somehow, impossibly, still glowed faintly beneath a thick layer of grime. She stepped out of the cruiser and pulled her coat tighter. The cabin stood as silent and still as before, wrapped in decades of solitude. Only this time, she wasn't coming to observe. She was coming to open what Sarah left behind. Inside, the air smelled of rain and rot. She crossed the threshold carefully, flashlight sweeping. The photograph was gone, secured in evidence, but the image of the two identical women lingered in her mind like a smudge on glass. She moved to the nightstand. The key from the drawer fit neatly into a small brass lock beneath the lower panel. It turned with a soft click. Jamie paused, heart pounding. She slid the drawer out. Beneath it was a false bottom, barely a quarter-inch thick. She wedged it up with a knife blade and peeled it loose. Underneath, a second compartment, lined in red felt, empty except for a folded sheet of paper, yellowed with time, and a thin magnetic strip, an old access card, government issue, coded and faded. The paper read Protocol initiated, August 13th, 1986. Subject, Whitlock, Sarah Marie. Phase 1 complete, compliant phase. Status unstable, recommend, containment, retention. Notes, memory separation successful, secondary identity established. Subject is responsive but unpredictable. Light fixation persists. Jamie's hands trembled. This wasn't delusion. It wasn't paranoia or abuse in the conventional sense. Sarah had been a subject in something. Tested, split. Camille had never been real. She had been implanted. A second identity laid over Sarah's own. A mask meant to overwrite, to control. Jamie exhaled shakily. This went far deeper than Alan Whitlock. She searched the rest of the cabin with more urgency now. Behind the old wardrobe, she found a notch in the wall, scraped as if something had been moved recently. She ran her fingers along the panel and felt a soft give. It popped free, revealing a narrow crawl space beneath the floorboards. She flicked her flashlight in. At the end of the space, barely 5 feet deep, lay a metal case, airtight, military grade. She slid it out, knelt beside it, and cracked the latches. Inside were 6 reel-to-reel tapes, each labeled in precise block letters. Phase 1, orientation. Phase 2, mirror work. Phase 3, re-entry attempt. Phase 4, override, subject recording. Camille isolated. Jamie stared at them in stunned silence. These weren't Sarah's tapes. They were Alan's. They were the program. Back at the station that afternoon, she brought them directly to evidence, bypassing even the deputy chief. Trish Monroe set up the first reel and threaded the tape. Jamie sat in the darkened booth as the playback began. The voice was Alan Whitlock's. Clinical, measured. Subject has responded well to name conditioning, shows signs of disassociation under light-based prompts. We've identified a trigger phrase. You left the light on. Causes significant emotional regression. Subject exhibits confusion followed by obedience. Camille persona now dominant for extended periods. Sarah's baseline memory appears fragmented. Jamie's jaw clenched. This wasn't just abuse. It was programming. Like breaking a horse. Like folding a person into pieces. She fast-forwarded to the final tape. Camille, isolated. A woman's voice filled the room. At first it sounded like Sarah, but the tone was different, flatter, colder. The light should stay on. It reminds me I'm here. I'm not supposed to forget. But sometimes I do. He says Sarah broke the rules. That's why I'm here now. I don't sleep anymore. He said I can't sleep. Camille doesn't need to sleep. Then silence. Then faint breathing. And then, quietly, as if through tears, "But I'm not Camille." I remember my name. My name is Sarah. Jamie leaned back from the desk, tears stinging her eyes. Sarah had clawed her way back from the inside. Whatever Alan had done, whatever shadow project he'd buried in that house, in that cabin, Sarah had survived it long enough to remember who she was. And now, finally, Jamie knew the real question. Not where Sarah had gone, but why no one had listened. October 9th, 2023. Location: Federal Records Archive, Raleigh, North Carolina. Jamie stood beneath the humming fluorescent lights of the Federal Records Archive like someone waiting for a door to open in a locked dream. The receptionist, mid-30s ponytail, nose piercing, blinked at her badge. "You're requesting sealed documents under a 1984 clearance code." "That's correct," Jamie said. "Clearance listed under Behavioral Research Initiative." The authorizing agent was Alan Whitlock. The receptionist narrowed her eyes. "And you believe this connects to a cold case?" Jamie hesitated, then leaned in. "I believe it connects to at least 4. That got her a pause. A quiet walk to the back office. A muffled phone call. 15 minutes later, Jamie was escorted to a room with a metal table, concrete walls, and a box already waiting for her. It was unmarked, except for a small sticker that read, BRI, Phase 2, 1983 to 1987. Use restricted. Inside the box, the first folder contained a project brief with government letterhead but no agency seal. The title read, Behavioral Reformation Initiative, Classified Experimental, Cognitive Identity Partition. Below that, in smaller type, Test Group. Alpha, subject pool composed of female civilians with psychological pliability and low public visibility. Isolation required. Memory triggers used to reinforce compartmentalization of personality traits. Jamie's skin prickled. She flipped to the second folder. There were names, some redacted, some not. Sarah Whitlock, Judith K. Ellison, Margaret Lee, Andrea Foster. Each was tagged with a psychological profile. Each one recommended for initial segmentation protocol. Each one had the same behavioral notation. Responds to light fixation. Reports memory loss following environmental control. Jamie turned to the last page. A letter typed on yellowing paper stamped Termination Order, Phase 2, dated October the 3rd, 1987. Subject Whitlock shows failure to maintain behavioral split. Reports of memory bleed and unprompted identity regression. Recommendation: containment and deactivation. Witness relocation unnecessary due to subject's psychological degradation. Jamie stared at the words. Deactivation. They hadn't just experimented on Sarah. They'd decided she wasn't working. And Alan, whether as agent or handler, had been the one to carry it out. By late afternoon, Jamie sat in her car in the archive's parking lot, staring at the rain-streaked windshield. She pulled out her notebook and drew a line between the 4 women's names. Only one was listed as presumed dead, Sarah. The others had been quietly placed in psychiatric institutions between 1985 and 1991. 2 were still alive. One, Margaret Lee, had been released from a long-term care facility just last year under a new name. Jamie made the call. 3 hours later, she stood outside a modest bungalow in Durham. The woman who opened the door was in her 60s, hair cropped close, hands trembling slightly on the doorknob. "Are you Margaret Lee?" Jamie asked. A pause. "I used to be," she said quietly. "Now they call me Ellen." Jamie introduced herself, careful not to show her badge too fast. "I believe you may have known a woman named Sarah Whitlock." Margaret's eyes widened, then narrowed, then dimmed. "I remember her face," she said, "but I remember it twice. That's the problem." Jamie was still. Margaret let her in. The living room was sparse. No photos, no mirrors, no television, just a single lamp and a framed drawing of a house with a porch light on. "I draw that one over and over," Margaret said, following her gaze. "Even before I knew her name, I saw it when I closed my eyes." "Do you remember what happened to you?" Jamie asked gently. Margaret's hands folded in her lap. "Not all of it, but enough." She glanced at the window. "They called it simulation, said we were helping national security, but it wasn't a simulation. They broke us apart, made copies of our thoughts, told us Camille was real, that she was better." Jamie leaned in. "Do you know who Camille was supposed to be?" Margaret gave her a small, pained smile. "She was supposed to be what was left after we forgot who we were." Jamie froze. "She was a construct," Margaret continued, "an empty room with new furniture. But sometimes you could hear the old floorboards creak." Silence filled the room. Then Jamie asked the question she hadn't dared until now. "Did Sarah ever try to fight it?" Margaret's voice trembled. "She didn't just fight it. She memorized it. Every room, every phrase. She knew the tape loops, the mirrors, the triggers. She told me once, if she ever vanished. I left the light on for someone to find me." Jamie swallowed hard. "She meant you," Margaret whispered. "Whoever you are, she meant you." October 10th, 2023. Location: Lake Lanier Property, North Carolina. The second porch light had never been part of the official report. It didn't show up on the floor plans, didn't exist in the original property survey. And yet, on the backside of the lake house, tucked under an overgrown lattice of ivy and warped shingles, it glowed faintly, green-tinted, as though it had been burning for decades without ever being seen. Jamie found it at 7:12 a.m., crouching near the crawlspace vent. Fog hovered low across the lake, thick as breath. The sun barely broke the horizon. Her fingers traced the warped siding, then the electrical conduit running from the house into the earth. The wire didn't connect to the grid. It led underground. By 9 a.m., she had the department's ground-penetrating radar unit set up in the backyard. Deputy Roy Finch handled the rig while she paced, silent. "There's something below," Roy muttered, peering at the screen. 10, maybe 12 feet down. Concrete walls, narrow footprint, not listed in county records. Jamie exhaled. Dig. By noon, the backhoe had cleared 3 feet of earth. At 5 feet, they hit the first cinder block. Beneath it, a reinforced hatch, rusted but intact, with a single word carved into its steel plate. Echo. Jamie stared, then dropped to her knees. The hatch took nearly an hour to break open. Inside, a ladder led into pitch blackness. The walls were metal-lined. No moisture, no scent. As Jamie descended with her flashlight, the beam revealed a narrow corridor, maybe 30 feet long, lined with insulation and soundproofing foam. At the end, a single wooden door, clean, untouched. She opened it. What she saw made her breath catch. It was a room, a perfect replica of the Whitlocks' living room. Same wallpaper, same couch, same floral lamp, still flickering in the corner, even the same painting of a river at dusk, except this one had no windows. And the ceiling, though high, was made of mirrored panels, a simulation chamber. Jamie's flashlight found an old camera embedded in the wall, its tape reel still intact. She found the recorder in the corner, dusty but operational. She pressed play. The tape whirred. Sarah appeared on screen, sitting on the couch in a floral robe, hands folded, staring directly into the lens. "If you're watching this," she said softly, I wasn't erased. Not completely. I remembered the rules. I obeyed when I had to. But I left myself cracks, mirrors, light. Camille was never real. She was his invention. But I let her walk around in my place so I could hide where he couldn't find me. And now, I need you to find the others. Jamie leaned forward. There are more rooms, more women, more lights still burning, but no one's been looking. So I left mine on. The screen went black, then flickered. A new image, static, distorted, showed a series of coordinates, 10-digit sequences, all U.S. locations. Jamie grabbed her notebook and scribbled them down. The last frame froze on Sarah's face again. This time, not in fear, but in defiance. By sunset, Jamie had returned to the surface. The list of coordinates buzzed in her mind like a ticking metronome. She called Trish Monroe at headquarters. "I found a chamber," she said. "Built to simulate a home environment, fully staged, surveillance capable. Sarah used it to store memory patterns. There are others like it, other subjects." Trish didn't speak for a long time. Finally, "Do you think she's still alive?" Jamie's answer was quiet. "I don't think Sarah Whitlock ever truly died." That night, Jamie returned to her apartment, too wired to sleep. She printed out the coordinates, marked them on a map. 5 states, 7 locations, 1 central radius, all within former jurisdiction of behavioral consulting branches defunded in the early 2000s. She looked again at the last coordinate. It was here, North Carolina, 50 miles away. Jamie grabbed her keys. October 11th, 2023. Location, abandoned street. Hildegard Mission Church, Wilkes County, North Carolina. By morning, the clouds had thickened to a pewter gray. Jamie's tires hissed along wet pavement as she pulled off the rural route onto a gravel path overtaken by weeds. The church appeared slowly through the trees. Brick faded to a soft ochre, windows boarded, steeple half collapsed. A rusted sign still swung on a crooked chain. St. Hildegard Mission. Closed. 1991. But the front porch light glowed. Jamie's breath caught. No power lines ran to the building, no meter, no signs of recent human presence, except that unwavering amber bulb, swaying slightly in the wind, casting its glow across a door carved with strange, looping symbols. She knocked once. The door opened by itself. Inside, the sanctuary was dark, but intact. Dust shimmered in the slivers of light that pierced the boarded windows. Pews lined up in perfect rows, untouched for decades. A tattered hymnal lay open on the altar. Jamie moved forward cautiously, footsteps echoing. Behind the altar, she spotted a stairwell leading downward. The air changed. Colder, denser. She descended. The basement had been transformed. The stone walls were padded in quilted insulation, painted a soft pink. In the far corner stood a white dresser, a small bed, perfectly made. A girl's name, Rachel, painted in neat letters on the headboard. But Rachel wouldn't have been a girl anymore. She would be nearing 60. Jamie took a slow breath. "Hello?" she called gently. "My name is Jamie. I'm not here to hurt you." Silence. Then, a voice. Calm. Too calm. "Camille said you'd come." Jamie turned. A woman stood in the far shadows, barefoot in a faded Sunday dress. Her gray hair curled like a child's. Her eyes were glassy but alert. She smiled. "I didn't think anyone remembered the light." Jamie stepped forward, voice steady. "Are you Rachel? Rachel Knowles?" The woman tilted her head. "I used to be, but he said Rachel was too noisy. So he gave me a new name." She leaned closer. "He called me Echo." The next 2 hours unfolded in layers. Rachel, Echo, was lucid in fragments. She remembered her birth name, her parents' farmhouse in Boone, a church picnic before she got sent to the Mirror Place. She had been taken in 1984 by a man she referred to only as the Doctor. When Jamie asked if the man was Alan Whitlock, Rachel flinched. "No," she whispered. "He wasn't the doctor. He was the recorder. He made the tapes." Tapes. Jamie's eyes swept the room. In the closet, beneath layers of folded children's dresses, she found a reel-to-reel player and a stack of recordings, each marked with symbols instead of names. She pressed play on the first one. Rachel's voice, younger, trembled through the speakers. "They said if I keep the light on, I'll always know where I am, but I don't know where I was before. Sometimes I'm Rachel. Sometimes I'm Echo. But I don't know which one goes with which memories. The girl in the mirror cries when I sleep." Jamie turned it off. Her stomach churned. This hadn't been isolation. It had been conditioning. Years of it. Maybe decades. Rachel wasn't alone in here. She was fractured, like Sarah had been. By nightfall, EMS had arrived. Rachel didn't resist. She sat on the porch as they examined her, eyes scanning the trees like she hadn't seen sky in years. Jamie sat beside her. "Did you ever meet Sarah?" Jamie asked softly. Rachel nodded. "Only once. She brought me a book, told me to keep it hidden." Jamie's pulse jumped. "Do you still have it?" Rachel smiled faintly. "It's under the bed." Jamie knelt and reached beneath the mattress. Wrapped in a cloth was a battered notebook. Inside were pages of names, dates, coordinates, and a list, handwritten in Sarah's tight, upright script. Subjects confirmed: Echo Rachel K. Camille, self-controlled. Juliet, Iris, Delta unconfirmed. Each had notes, locations, status. The last page bore only one sentence: "If I disappear, keep the light on for the others." Jamie's eyes burned. Sarah had known what she was doing. She hadn't just survived. She had documented everything and buried it like seeds, waiting to be found. That night, Jamie submitted the notebook and tapes into federal evidence. She stared at the last photo of Rachel in the ambulance, gray-haired, fragile, smiling faintly at the flashing lights, as though she'd emerged from a lifetime-long dream. There were still more names to follow, but at least now, one light had gone out because it was finally safe to. October 13th, 2023. Location: former BRI field office, Flat Rock, North Carolina. Jamie stood at the mouth of the trail, boots crunching on frost-kissed gravel. The forest around her was thick with silence. No birdsong, no wind, just the creak of trees too old to care who came looking. Ahead, half buried beneath moss and bramble, was what used to be the Behavioral Reformation Initiative's Southern Satellite Office. Now it looked like a collapsed ranger station. But the steel sign jutting from the ground told a different story. Property of the Department of Adaptive Response. Access restricted. No such department existed anymore. Jamie checked twice. She stepped forward. Inside, the air was stale and chemical. The walls were concrete, windowless. Emergency lights flickered, powered by a backup generator that had somehow survived the years. Most of the offices were empty. Metal desks overturned, papers mildewed, ceiling tiles hanging like loose teeth. But behind a locked metal door in the rear hallway, she found what she came for: the archive room. Rows of cabinets stood like tombstones. Each drawer bore a subject designation. She opened one marked IRIS-03. Inside, a child's drawing, a lock of hair sealed in plastic, and a logbook. Subject initiated at age 6. Memory division successful. Routine maintenance with phase 2 auditory triggers. Subject responded with high mimicry. Assigned to guardian setting and controlled foster placement. Jamie's throat tightened. They hadn't just conditioned the women. They'd placed them into homes, churches, schools, rewired identities, and seeded them back into the world. She opened another drawer. Delta 05. Failure to retain primary conditioning. Subject ran. Recovery effort launched but unsuccessful. Terminated program arm in April 1989. Unresolved. And then one marked simply, SARAH-01. Jamie froze. Inside Sarah's file was more than just logs. There were transcripts. Session 17, March 15, 1985. Interviewer, Recorder Whitlock. Subject, Camille, Chat, Sarah. Tell me where you are right now. In the red house, the one with no doors. What's in the red house? The others, they're whispering, but the walls won't remember. Who are you right now? Camille. And who is Sarah? She's the echo. Jamie's hands shook. She kept reading. Session 19, April 2nd, 1985. Interviewer, Recorder Whitlock. Subject, Camille, sus, Sarah. Why do you keep turning the light on? Because if it's on, someone might find me. Who? Me. By afternoon, Jamie had filled 2 notebooks. The final drawer was marked Reintegration Attempts. Inside were notes from the early 90s. Sarah's name appeared again, crossed out. So did Rachel's, Iris, Juliet. Only one name remained unscored, Andrea Foster. A sticky note attached to her file read, Placed in observational care. No reversion symptoms since 2005. Terminate surveillance if stable through 2023. Jamie's stomach dropped. That was this year. An hour later, she sat in her car, signal just strong enough to place the call. Trish, she said, I need a background run on a woman named Andrea Foster. Last known alias, Lucy Grange. She may be the final active subject. Trish's voice came back tense. You think she's still conditioned? I think they left her out there. On purpose. Silence. Then, where is she now? Jamie checked the printout from Sarah's notebook. 2 hours south of me. Listed as a care home nurse under a false ID. I think she doesn't even know who she is anymore. By nightfall, Jamie was on the road again. Maps spread across the passenger seat. Sarah's final notes folded in her jacket pocket. The light had led her from simulation rooms to sealed churches to forgotten basements. But now, it was leading her somewhere even more uncertain. To someone who never left the role they were forced to become. The last file in the box had included a warning. Subjects left in place too long may integrate beyond recall. Cognitive destabilization likely if identity challenged directly. Jamie read it again, then closed the notebook. She would have to be careful. October 14th, 2023. Location, Pinecrest Haven. Assisted living, Rutherford County, North Carolina. The entrance to Pinecrest Haven didn't look like the endpoint of a decades-old government experiment. It looked ordinary. Brick arches, manicured hedges, an American flag snapping gently above the circular driveway. A plastic sign by the lobby read, Family is forever. Behind the front desk, a woman in scrubs greeted Jamie with a tired smile. Visiting someone? Jamie nodded. Andrea Foster. I was told she works here. The woman scanned a clipboard. Oh, Lucy. Yeah, she's on the evening rotation. Breaks in about 15. You can wait in the garden if you want. She always goes out there. Jamie thanked her, then stepped into the garden, heart thrumming in her chest. By 4:30 p.m., the sun was dipping behind the oak trees that flanked the rear courtyard. Jamie sat on a wrought iron bench, notebook in her lap. And then, quiet footsteps. A woman emerged from the double doors, clutching a styrofoam cup. Her hair was silvery blonde, neatly braided. She wore soft gray scrubs and orthopedic shoes. Late 50s, early 60s. Her face was familiar. Not because Jamie had seen it before, but because it was the face from Sarah's notes. The last name not crossed off. The final light still burning. Andrea Foster, known here as Lucy Grange. She sat down on the far end of the bench, sipping her tea. Beautiful today? She said, not looking at Jamie. Jamie nodded. Yes, I'm Jamie. I was hoping to ask you a few things if that's okay. Lucy smiled politely. About what? Jamie chose her words carefully. About a woman named Sarah Whitlock. She used to live near Summerfield Lake. Something in Lucy's expression flickered. I don't know her, she said flatly. Jamie nodded again, slow. That's okay. Sometimes names change. Sometimes people forget things on purpose. Lucy's smile tightened. That's a strange thing to say. Jamie pulled a folded photo from her notebook. Sarah in the simulation room, floral robe, eyes fierce. She laid it between them. She left a message for you, said to keep the light on. Lucy's breath caught, just slightly. Jamie waited. Minutes passed in silence. Then Lucy said, barely above a whisper, I don't know what you think this is. I think you're the last one, Jamie said. I think they left you here and hoped you'd never remember. Lucy didn't respond. Instead, she stood, walked to the edge of the garden path, stared out at the fading light. You ever wake up in the wrong body? She said softly, like your voice isn't yours. Your name doesn't fit in your mouth. Jamie approached, careful. Yes, I think Sarah did too. Lucy closed her eyes. Sometimes I dream about a room. Red walls, no windows, just a door with no knob. There's music playing, but it's backwards. And someone, he keeps asking me questions, over and over, until I say them back. Jamie reached into her coat pocket. She wrote about that too. She handed Lucy the final page of the notebook. A sketch, crudely drawn but unmistakable. The room, the mirror, the recorder. At the top, if she's still out there, she'll remember the hymn. Jamie whispered, there's a light that never fails, even in the darkest veil. Lucy's eyes filled with tears. She sang the next line, guiding souls the long way home, where the morning always comes. Something broke then, not in a painful way, more like a spell dissolving. Lucy sat back down on the bench, crying silently, as if mourning someone she hadn't known she'd lost. Jamie sat beside her. I think your name was Juliet, she said gently. That's what Sarah called you in her logs. You were one of the earliest placements, and the longest running. Lucy, Juliet, nodded slowly. I don't know who I was before, but I remember a song, a porch light, a voice that told me if I left it on, someone might find me. You did, Jamie said. You left it on for 36 years. Juliet looked at her, then whispered, was she real? Jamie didn't have to ask who. Yes, she said. She was real, and she fought like hell to get you back. That night, Jamie filed an official request to transfer Juliet into protected psychological care. Her false identity was stripped from public record. The facility would be closed, reclassified as an investigative site. As she drove back toward Summerfield Lake, the stars were just beginning to shimmer through the dusk haze. She passed a row of homes, ordinary, safe, unaware of the darkness that had hidden in plain sight for so long. And outside one of them, on a quiet porch, a single light still burned. October 16th, 2023. Location: the Lake House, Summerfield Lake, North Carolina. The lake was still, not calm, still. The kind of stillness that made Jamie uneasy, like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting to exhale only after she opened the door. She hadn't returned to the lake house since the first storm, not since the night she found Sarah's tapes and the light had flickered like it knew she was watching. But now, after Rachel's rescue, after Juliet's awakening, she needed to come back, to the beginning. The house looked the same, peeling paint, cracked porch boards, porch light glowing faintly in the gray dusk. Jamie stood at the base of the steps, heart in her throat. She climbed them slowly. The key still worked. Inside, the air was musty with memory. The same moth-bitten curtain hung over the front window. A photo of Sarah as a child, taped to the fridge. The rotary phone on the kitchen wall blinked with a single red light. Jamie ignored it. She moved toward the back room. This had always been the quietest part of the house. No echoes, no wind. Just a lingering hush. The room still smelled like Sarah, lavender, dust, and old books. The dresser remained untouched. The mirror, draped in cloth, stood tall in the corner. Jamie reached out, pulled the cloth free. The mirror reflected nothing. No light, no outline, just darkness. She stepped closer. That's when she saw it. Carved into the frame, so faint it was nearly gone, were the same looping symbols from the church basement, but beneath them, a line of scratched text in English. She left the light on for me. I'll leave it on for you. Jamie touched the glass. A sudden click. The dresser shifted. Behind it, hinges. A hidden door. Heart racing, Jamie pushed it open. The space behind the wall was narrow, wooden, and lined with insulation. A crawl space, but it led downward into the foundation, into a chamber Jamie hadn't known existed. She descended, flashlight in hand. It was a cell, padded walls, a rusted cot, and on the far wall, dozens of tally marks, scratched with something sharp. Years' worth. In the center of the floor, a recorder, battery-powered. Jamie knelt, pressed play. Sarah's voice emerged, older now. Resolute. If you're hearing this, it means I never came back. But I tried. God, I tried. I thought if I just played along long enough, he'd let me go, or let the others go. He wasn't a doctor. He was a believer, in control, in silence, in erasing names and writing new ones. They weren't just experiments. We were replacements. Each of us trained to step into someone else's life and forget our own. But the light... it always brought something back. A flicker, a name, a hymn. So I kept it on. For Rachel, for Juliet, for me. And now, a pause, then static, then barely audible. The door is in the mirror, but only if you know which name to use. The tape clicked off. Jamie sat in the dark a long time. No name would open that mirror now, because Sarah had given hers away, piece by piece, to keep the others whole. Jamie stood, climbed back to the room, looked once more into the mirror. This time, her reflection stared back. But behind her, just for a breath, she swore she saw Sarah's silhouette, watching, then gone. She left the house after midnight, locked the door behind her. The porch light burned like it always had. Steady, software waiting. Jamie left it on. For whoever came next, for whoever still needed to find the way out of the dark. November 2nd, 2023. Location, Washington, D.C. Senate Subcommittee on Ethics and Oversight. The chamber was colder than it needed to be. Jamie sat alone at the witness table, a folder in front of her labeled Operation Iris, Recovered Subject Files, 1981 to 1992. Behind her, the gallery was nearly full. Reporters, researchers, survivors under new names. Juliet was here, seated in the back, eyes steady. Trish, too, next to her. Rachel hadn't come, but she'd written a statement. The chairman adjusted his glasses. Ms. Kavanaugh, you may proceed. Jamie took a breath, then began. For 36 years, a woman named Sarah Whitlock was listed as a missing person in North Carolina. Her case went cold within weeks, but Sarah hadn't vanished. She had been silenced. Jamie opened the folder, slid the first photo forward. A child's drawing, a mirror, a hand reaching from the dark. This investigation reveals the existence of a clandestine psychological conditioning program carried out by a privatized behavioral group known internally as the Behavioral Reformation Initiative, BRI, operating in the shadow of federal oversight during the late 1980s. She met their eyes. They used women, children. They erased identities, installed replacements, and created test subjects that were then placed back into communities to observe long-term cognitive compliance. Another photo, a room with no windows. Their names were changed, their histories rewritten, but a handful fought back. She read from Sarah's final tape transcript. Her voice wavered once, but never broke. The light doesn't bring us out. It brings us back in, to who we were before they tried to make us someone else. Sarah Whitlock risked her life to leave that light on, for others to follow. Rachel found it. Julia, too. There may be more. She closed the folder. I'm not asking for convictions today. I'm asking that their names be restored, that they are no longer whispers in sealed files, that they are heard. A long silence. Then the chairman cleared his throat. Ms. Kavanaugh, thank you for your testimony. This committee will move forward with public disclosure proceedings effective immediately. A gavel tapped once. The session adjourned. Outside, the air was brisk. Autumn leaves skittered across the marble steps of the Capitol. Jamie stepped into the light of early evening, the sun dipping low behind the obelisk. Reporters surged forward, microphones raised. But Jamie just smiled, held up a photo of Sarah, and said one sentence. She left the light on. We're just finally looking where it led. She turned, coat billowing behind her, and walked toward the morning.